That's no moon. It's a space station.
Star Wars was the ultimate celluloid gamble.
I remember thinking it's really hard to keep a straight face doing this stuff.
I mean, there's this giant guy in a dog suit walking around. It was ridiculous.
We had no money to stay anywhere, and we got paid nothing.
That became an unstoppable force.
There were lines around the block.
No one thought it would do what it did, but what happened changed everything.
From the opening scroll.
Suddenly the film starts, and every kid in the audience started screaming.
I had never seen anything in a movie, anything like that.
To the story behind the smoothest line in the galaxy.
I love you.
I love you too. That was the line that was written.
So I suggested that we change the line.
I know.
And like a pimp, he just says, I know.
Star Wars transformed a generation.
My whole career may be built on, talking about the Death Star.
I was going to marry Luke Skywalker. He was truly the love of my life.
And lives on today.
I'm real excited about getting it on DVD, and I've always was wondering what took so long.
These are the stories of Hollywood's greatest space epic, told by the people who lived them.
We were keeping many secrets about the film.
Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father.
Irvin Kershner brought me aside and said, here's what the real story is.
When Star Wars ruled the world.
In a world where only lightsabers sold and the dark side was a crime.
Our heroes were taken over and turned into action figures.
And so began a time of pure
Skywalker.
where only the Force reigned.
And Jedi
was the name of the game.
When Star Wars ruled the world.
In the 70s, most films were more realistic, more hard-edged, more a reflection of their times.
People were still reeling from Vietnam and the tension. I don't think there were a lot of movies out that you sat there having a good time at.
Films like Raging Bull and Taxi Driver.
The 70s were a kind of era of the independents.
At that time, you had all of these wonderful filmmakers that were emerging.
Coppola and Scorsese and
Kubrick, of course. That's when I was first turned on to George Lucas.
George had a pretty good idea of wanting to do something like Flash Gordon was from the 1930s.
He's a brave man and will be royally rewarded.
So started from scratch on the idea of a science fiction space opera-like story, and that became Star Wars.
No! No!
Well, I knew George Lucas from American Graffiti. I was working part-time as a carpenter at Goldwyn Studio. One morning early, George Lucas walked in with Richard Dreyfuss for the first interview for Star Wars. Several weeks later, I was asked if I would help George and his casting director read other actors who were auditioning for the part.
You like it? That's impossible. What's going on?
Empire must have gotten here first. The planet's been totally blown away. We have to find the rebels. What we're carrying belongs to them.
All right. You got a ship. But where do we go from here?
It was clear that he was really good for the Han Solo part, so he became the first choice.
I was fortunate enough to get the part.
A friend of mine said, have you gone out for that new George Lucas movie? It's supposed to be like Flash Gordon. I'll never forget reading the screenplay for the first time and thinking, oh my gosh, because it was called The Adventures of Luke Skywalker, is taken from the Journal of the Whills, Saga #1, The Star Wars. I went in and did a video screen test. George seemed uncomfortable with me peppering him with questions. I certainly didn't have the sense when I left where, wow, I really nailed that.
They read anybody that was my age and living that was in California, if not in New York.
When little R2 has been safely delivered to my forces, you'll receive your reward.
So I went in and read.
Carrie Fisher ended up being the ideal one, even though on the surface she wasn't necessarily as classically Hollywood pretty as some of the others.
I got the job of this movie with the caveat that I lose 10 pounds. And I went to a fat farm. It was a nightmare. I was terrified they were going to look at me and say, bring in Jodie Foster and get that fat girl out of here.
She had the right kind of personality. She was feisty and she was witty, and it just worked for the character.
I think what happened was that they picked a trio. They picked a princess, a pirate, and a farm boy.
They weren't similar, but they were similar in strength.
It was 1976. I think that was when we started.
We were going to go to North Africa and do all the desert scenes.
The first day's filming in the desert in Tunisia was absolutely engraved on my memory.
We'd come a week after Jesus of Nazareth had filmed, and it just seemed so odd to be in such an antiquated environment doing something that was meant to be futuristic.
In Tunisia, we had high winds and we had sandstorms, but that's pretty normal for the Sahara Desert.
Probably the most scary moment was when I just realized they were talking about the melting point of plastic. As in, how hot can this suit get before it starts to melt?
Kenny Baker played R2-D2 some of the time because he really was a radio-controlled robot.
They'd say cut, lunch 1 hour, and they'd all walk away for lunch and leave me in the robot.
My costume would regularly break. In the middle of a scene, they'd suddenly say, his eyes went out, or his leg just dropped off. George would come and frown at somewhere on my body. It wasn't my fault.
I went to England to do costume fittings and meet the crew on the British side of things.
And we had any money to stay anywhere. And we got paid nothing. So there was no budget, nothing.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
Very first day on the set, we were running down the Death Star. Very first day of shooting for Carrie. And she disappeared, and she came back about 20 minutes later. She said, ooh. I said, what? They taped me down. She had been running, and she wasn't wearing a bra.
They saw some rushes, and it indicated that maybe a bra was in order. There is no lingerie in space. So they put gaffer tape. And I thought that it would be nice for the crew if they auctioned off who would get to rip the tape off at the end of the day. But they never did that.
There was a general atmosphere on the set that we were making a complete turkey.
Well, it was clear what the English crew were thinking. They would stand around all day long, shaking their heads and sighing.
The shooting crew in London was not particularly enamored with the project.
I mean, there's this giant guy in a dog suit walking around. It was ridiculous.
At least my costume was comfortable.
I remember thinking it's really hard to keep a straight face doing this stuff. I mean, Alec Guinness sitting next to a Wookiee. What's wrong with this picture?
On Star Wars, nobody gave a hoot about what we were filming.
There were executives at the studio that felt that it was a folly and that it should never have been done.
The Christmas of '76, 6 months before it opened, I said to Carrie, hey, you know what? They're showing the trailer at the Avco embassy. Let's go stick our heads in.
20th Century Fox and George Lucas bring you an adventure unlike anything on your planet.
And all I know is at the end of the trailer, it says,
1 billion years in the making, Star Wars.
And it's coming to your galaxy this summer. And there's a big explosion. And someone, a wise guy in the back goes, yeah, and it's coming to late night TV about 2 months after that.
Coming up, Star Wars opens with a bang.
Suddenly the film starts, and every kid in the audience started screaming.
I had never seen anything in a movie, anything like that.
And later, stone cold love.
So I suggested that we change the line.
I love you.
I
know. And like a pimp, he just says, I know.
Next on When Star Wars Ruled the World.